Hello, my name is Joel Thomas. I'm a 3D artist at Territory Studio. I'd like to start just by thanking Heather and Matthias and the Maxon team for putting on this event and for allowing me to contribute. So like I said, I'm a 3D artist at Territory Studio, and I've been there for 2 years. And, I was with them a little bit before that freelancing, so it's been a little bit longer. But I got my start in 3D, a little while ago, I guess relatively speaking. And I was just doing low poly modeling for, computer game mods, stuff like that, just as a hobby. And then in college sometime, I was trying to pick up Cinema 4D. And so to do that, I was watching a lot of presentations like this from Maxon. So with this, I'm hoping to make a presentation that I would have found useful at the time. And hopefully you might, learn a thing or two or find it useful as well. So more about Territory. We're a design and VFX house. We've worked on, films and games, a lot of cool stuff. So let's go ahead and watch a reel, and I'll see you on the flip side.
What do you want, Joe?
I want to ask you some questions.
Initiating what now?
Let the hunt for Halliday's Easter egg begin.
That went well.
All right, cool stuff. So generally, if people are familiar with our work, this is the work that they know of because it's the cool screen graphics you've seen in theaters, But in addition to that, we've also worked on, digital products, experiences, and work for brands, a lot of stuff actually. So here's just a selection of projects that I was working on most recently. So at the top, we've got this project we were doing with General Motors for the Lyriq, which is their electric car that they've announced. And it was cool just to see this work go online, and it was just a good project to be involved in because, they were so receptive to, our input, and the work that we were creating for them. And I also worked on this spot here for Amazon Web Services, which was just for their next-gen stats campaign for the football season. And I also got the chance to work on this next-generation prosthetic limb concept here when we were working with Atom Limbs. So that was just to make a design that was a little bit friendlier and more approachable. So I'm really looking forward to see where that goes. Finally, I just have some just robot arm drawings that you can see here that I've posted on my Instagram. And there I just post it's kind of like my digital sketchbook. So mostly it's just 2D work right now. So one of my New Year's resolutions actually, which I'm a little bit late on, was to do more personal 3D work. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity for this presentation to create something on the side to, break down, talk about, tricks and techniques and just general workflow used. So hopefully it could be, helpful. And it'd be nice if I had some more time to work on it, make something a little bit longer, but, I still enjoyed it nonetheless. So let's give that a look now. All right, and there it was. So like I said, it'd be nice to make something a little bit longer. So maybe I can expand this, and rework it into a longer piece that maybe makes a little bit more sense, because this is, quite short. It's just more or less a series of experiments. But none of the elements are actually very complex, so we should be able to recreate some, talk about a little bit of the animation in there. But before that, I just want to talk about what the general process for me is. So the first thing I do is just I ruffle through some paper and I'm just like writing down, probably can't see that at all. But on these, it's just like keywords to factor into, just, reminders to have, and you're kind of settling in on a general idea. And, I'm also doing some, UI type sketches just to come up with some patterns. And ultimately I settle in on a storyboard that I make, because I like to have an idea of what I'm going to make before I really start. I know some people are a little bit more experimental, but just how I roll. All right. And then the next thing that I do is make a Pinterest board. So here it's just gathering images that inspire you in some way, or maybe it's just an outright reference of something, for lighting or for the modeling quality, and, just getting a general idea to that kind of quality level that you're aspiring to. But there's additionally more reference I have on hand for things like the metallic skull, or just extra lighting references or material references, because that's also really helpful to have as you go. And just talk about what we'll be doing. So like I said, we'll be talking about the scene building, and we'll be able to remodel some of the stuff that's in here and look at a couple of different setups I have, and talk a little bit about optimization and animation. And finally, we'll talk about rendering using the take system, which is something they actually use quite often. All right, so that's it. Let's get into 3D then. All right, here we are in 3D. So I'm just going to give a bird's eye view of the 4 scenes and what kind of objects I have in here, because I always thought it was helpful to see other artist viewport previews, because I'm always curious how the scenes are built, what the geometry looks like, things like that. So let's just keep this pretty high level, like I said. So we have pretty much, if I hit S here, it's going to jump to where it is in the object manager. So it's really composed mostly out of primitive shapes. See, I just have triangles and hexagons, and those are given thickness with a cloth surface object like this one. And I have a Motex object in the center here, and that's being animated on with just some effectors. And these are just some cubes in the background, which are in a fracture object, which is also being drawn on with another plane effector. I have splines I've drawn and animated on with the Spline. And overall, just the pieces created with glass materials, which is just a standard octane glass with just a roughness coefficient and a transmission color. That's it. And then emission or emissive textures. And I'm just using a black body emission or a texture emission on those, and that's pretty much it. Now on this next one, the kind of neural network stuff, and each one of these takes, I've turned on a different system I have inside of each one of these parents. And I render all these out, and I'm just compositing them in After Effects. So I'm not even sure I used all of these in the end, but it's always good to just make more than you need and see what you can do with the stuff that you've built. So we'll definitely go over some of those. For the tunnel, it's a tracer that I've put a sweep object on, and the tracer is just tracing some nulls I have here, and then we're cloning just some basic cubes to the sweep itself, and putting, this is for example as a helix that has been swept, and that's spline wrapped the whole thing, and then we have some atom arrays on some more of the sweeps. And this also has takes as well, just for some additional objects to have interesting reflections with this reflective metal tube. And that's all that really goes on in this scene. And again, it's really basic materials, simple metals and emissive materials. And this last one is the one that looks a little bit more complicated, and that's just because it's got more models in the background. So I modeled these pipes, the cables on the floor, on the ceiling, And the floor itself I kit bashed because I didn't have enough time to model that as well, or else I would have, just because I enjoy that kind of thing. And recently I've been trying to incorporate ZBrush into my work, so that's how I made this skull here. I'm going to turn off the lights so that you can see it a little bit better. So yeah, this was a fun thing to try out, and I just got a mesh that I could use in Cinema 4D, and then I extruded the panels in here after getting the model out of ZBrush. And then the rib cage and spine, I actually found a basic low poly skeleton, and then I was able to model more off of that just to have a base to work from to get it to go a little bit faster. And yeah, the textures are pretty simple on this one, so most of the work on this one is actually the modeling and just having some lights in here. So yeah, let's see how many of these assets that we can make from these scenes. So just a quick note about hotkeys before we move on. So Cinema 4D uses a 2-prong keystroke system. So if I type in M, for example, that's the modeling tools. So you can see all of your operations are there. So the next key you hit will select a different tool. And you also have U for selection. So that's M modeling for modeling tools, U for selection, and then N for viewport controls. There's also right clicking, which will give you different tools depending on which one of these modes that you're in. So you can see I have different stuff now that I'm in the polygon faces. And the last thing I'll be doing is switching between these modes here with 1, 2, 3, and 4 as my shortcut keys. And that doesn't ship with Cinema by default. So if you want to switch to that, you can go to Customize Commands. If you hover over a button, it'll let you know what it's called, so you can type it in here, say points. And now when you click this, I can just type in right here what I want my shortcut key to be. So for me personally, I just thought that switching between these modes was a little bit more convenient to do with those keys than what they are by default, which is viewport commands, I believe. So the final thing to say is just, definitely get an idea as to what tools that you have here, and you'll be able to fly through these while you're modeling instead of having to, learn what different operations do, or digging through menus to find them, because it's all nested right here for you, which I think is actually very helpful. All right. Actually, there's a few more shortcuts I should cover just in case I forget to mention them later. And that's, if I have an object selected here, I can alt-click a new object to have it spawn as a parent, and I can shift-click to have it spawn as a child. I can also control-drag to duplicate an object stack in the Object Manager as well as in the viewport. And I can control-click one of these enable switches to turn off the children as well, and this will work on anything that you see this check mark next to. I can also select all these. I could say Shift-G, and that will, there we go. That will take the children outside of the parent. And I could also Control-A and Alt-G to put them all into a parent null, and that's going to spawn at the center of all the axes of the objects that I have selected. There's another handy trick, which is if I middle mouse wheel click this parent object, it'll also select all of the children underneath as well. So I definitely use that one a lot. And I can alt click to toggle the invisibility or the visibility switch for the top and bottom. And if I hit Control and Alt, it'll do it for the whole stack. All right, and finally, I spawn a cylinder here. I can hit C to make an object editable. And in the edge mode, if I double click an edge loop, it's going to select the whole loop for me. So I could do that instead of hitting UL, which is the loop select. This additionally allows me to select boundary edges and boundary loop. But most of the time, just a simple double click will select the whole loop that you want. And I can also control drag to do a kind of extrude function here with edges as well as polygon faces. So instead of hitting MT to extrude it just in this one dimension, I can just use this regular cursor and control drag or drag off to the side. Right, yeah, that'll do. Let's talk about how I made those pipes inside of the robot scene. So make a plane, indeed see it this way. All right, that's enough subdivisions. All right, make it editable, and then in edge selection you can do UM, and now you have this tool here, which will select in a line following where you're dragging your cursor, which is pretty helpful. So then you can do right click, edge to spline. Now we have this here. And let's throw this into a sweep object. Put it inside in there. This is too big. So the next thing we're going to do, drag it out. Just hide that for a second. And we want to chamfer these edges, and we're going to do that procedurally with a tool that you can find inside the CV toolbox, which is available on Cineversity, and that's called the CV-Splines. So it's just a parametric way to edit your splines. Right, it's chamfered them, but that's limited by what the nearest vertex neighbor is. So if we delete those, we can get a larger radius, like so. Let's make one more of them. And let's up the subdivision count. Cool. And we can actually drag a couple, or grab a couple of these and control drag them up and make one that goes out this way as well as, you know, going to the side. Same process. And then let's just copy that and put this one inside instead. I keep missing. All right, there we go. Cool. Now for the, and see back to this view, for the, whoops, for the rings around it, I'm stuck in edge mode, that's why. Let's grab a cylinder. Doesn't matter where it is because we're going to end up cloning it onto it. Let's just make this one editable. Double click, and MN for dissolve. Now let's do a loop selection on these polygons and extrude inner about there and just scale up. Something like that. Extrude inner again. And then MT for extruding inside. And let's grab these top and bottom faces. Extrude inner as well. And we can delete these because we'll actually never see them. Next thing to do is to bevel all these edges, so we can do UN for the selection mode, which will allow us to set this Phong angle for which edges it's going to select. So at about there, we're getting all the ones that we want. And we have to be in plane select, or sorry, edge select. And we have all those. Let's just store this edge selection. And we can put a bevel deformer inside of there and lower that down, but put this edge selection in there. All right. Now let's hit Alt and down click there to make the radius smaller. Let's get one extra subdivision. And the reason why you'd want to do that is because now we can actually just turn this off and we can drag this ring selection. You know, we could scoot it up, for example, and the bevel would then, you know, apply to it there. All right. Let's throw this into a subdivision surface. Look, looks nice. All right. And let's just put this in a group. Grab another cylinder. Make it way smaller. And put this in an atom array. Not an atom array, just a regular array, excuse me. And we only want, let's just do 4 copies, so we have 5 little pieces there. And we can clone this onto the vertices. this. It's going to do surface by default, but let's just switch that, or sorry, it's doing count. Let's do it vertex. Rotate 90. Great. And let's just grab this and scale tool, make it smaller. There we go. Awesome. All right, so that's all there is to these pipes. And if we wanted to put these in an array, we could grab a matrix object, linear, add some more clones, and let's just group these and make a cloner. Both of those are in there. Drag this underneath the matrix, because for the order of operations later, we'll need to be like that. We can actually do render instance probably. Select the matrix, boom, there we go. And now to rotate them, you actually have to use the matrix transform instead of the cloners, because it's cloning it directly onto the matrix coordinates. And let's just have it iterate randomly. Cool. So if you had a bunch of different tube types, then this would look nicer. So let's throw a bevel in here. Fit to parent. And let's make this visible for us. Can't really quite see what's going on. I'm going to control click that to turn everything off that's inside of here. And let's see how this is bending. All right, it always bends like that. So let's rotate, oops, not like that. Just grab the green, link shift, and turn it this way. Let's change the dimensions of this to 100 and length. There we go. Cool. All right, and then we can control click that back on. So you can see now that the pipes are bending along that and they're not deforming, because if you put the bend and the cloner together, it would have deformed the pipe's geometry, but now they're staying the same and we got a nice clean look to all these. All right. Let's quickly model some cables like I have in that robot scene. Put this on X. Make it thinner. So let's do 3 different types. Let's get a higher subdivision here. And we actually don't need caps on any of these. I'm going to turn it off. And this will do, let's just make that editable. And cables are fun because it's a good way to explore the modeling tools. And you know, it's hard to make it look bad, so just, you know, like with this one, just make this larger here, and let's go to edge mode, and we can actually bevel an edge with MS. Let's get another 2 subdivisions in here, so we can grab this one, shrink it, nice, and then let's just let's use UN to get our edge selection again, but I don't really want this one here to be beveled, so I'm just going to control click that with a loop selection, bevel this, nice. Now we can throw this into a subdivision surface. You know, see how it looks? Looks good. And we'll put this into a cloner. Since we know that the length is 200, we can offset it 200 in the X, 0 in the Y. And you know, you can just clone it as much as you need to. All right, next one. Let's see. For this one, let's do that kind of braided cable look. So let's make it actually half the size. 200, 10, why not? We want the segments to be almost square on this one because it'll help the loop selection that we're going to do. Go ahead and make it editable. And we're going to Control A to select all these and then bevel them. But we need to hit limit on this and drop our subdivisions all the way down. Now we can right click and hit optimize. And that's going to merge everything that's underneath the tolerance that you can see when you hit this gear right there. So now all the vertices are merged. We can go in face mode, and now we can select loops like a candy cane. Grabbing all these. Nice. Now let's just extrude those out. And let's get rid of these edge bits here. Pretty quick just to delete those. I'm just manually selecting them for now. Alright, so we're going to also do a subdivision surface on this, but let's get some control edges. So maybe we can do, oops, we can go into edge mode, select all these, and then invert our selection and do MF for the edge cut and apply. And actually let's do 2 subdivisions and scoot it out a little bit to scale. Alright, cool. So when we subdivide that, it'll look, nice and smooth. Awesome. And we can clone this just the same way. 0, 100 this time, I believe. Cool. Doesn't match up. I mean, we could rotate it slightly. Close enough. Alright. This last one, let's punch some holes in it. Let's just do 8 here. And make it about square. Actually, let's make it a little bit longer because I want to illustrate something. Alright, make that editable. Go here, Control A, and if we do extrude inner and uncheck preserve groups, excuse me, then we can shrink it in and then hit delete on this. So now let's actually we're going to need a cylinder here afterwards, so let's go back into object mode, just shift put a cylinder under there, and that's just a convenient way of getting it in the same location. Put it on X, shrink it down, expand it. Alright, let's hide that for now. So let's go in face mode here and subdivide, which is going to be off screen, but there's a little gear next to the subdivide option, just like there is on optimize right there. So let's click that and hit smooth subdivision. So that's treating it a lot like the subdivision surface. Let's do that one more time. And the control for that is actually US. Cool. Awesome. Now let's turn this back on. And to get rid of this kind of like golf ball looking effect, let's put a shrink wrap here. Shrink wrap it to this one, but we're going to need more subdivisions. Let's do 32. Cool. Right click current state to object. Now we can delete this and that one. So the thing I wanted to illustrate beforehand, we still have a little bit of an issue there, but from afar it won't matter. But right here we can specify the length actually. So if I just wanted to be 100, I can actually type it in and hit apply, which is very handy. Now let's just select everything and extrude it out. And just UI to invert. Oops, actually, we don't want to grab all that. So let's just UL, loop select, get rid of these. Nice. Cool. And let's go ahead and bevel these edges just a little bit. And 1, 2. Cool. Great. So the next thing you need to do, let's just do sketch some splines. So if I were to draw that one, hit F1 to go back to this view, I can grab this, put it in a null, and then shift click a spline wrap into there. Now I can select that spline that I drew, and there we go. So you could either have it keep the length or fit the spline. So keep length is gonna not deform it, and fit spline is gonna stretch it out. So, if you're happy with it stretching, then that works just as well. All right, let's look into making some of those cables that we have hanging from the ceiling. So for this, by the way, if you're wondering why I didn't have a grid visible this whole time, it's because it's turned off. Anyway, so let's just get a cube in here and make another cube. Just gonna drag it off by control dragging, and we'll do a tracer between these two. So if I select both of them, and the tracer is in here, and let's turn off trace vertices and do connect objects, and let's just make that editable. I just think this is a pretty quick way to make a straight spline that's perfectly straight, not off by anything. This is exactly in the center. It's nice. So let's subdivide this again. That's at the bottom of this list. So let's do that once, twice, 3 times. Yeah, let's do it one more time. Might be excessive, but right here, now what we can do is, if you do select everything with Control A and UI, oops, that's not what I meant to do. You do UK to shrink your selection first, and then UI, and let's add a hair tag onto this for spline dynamics, and we'll set these as fixed points that we have, and then hit play. Actually, we need to make this much longer just so that we can get the effect. All right, so it's going to droop down, and we'll turn the stiffness all the way down, and the rubber like to 2 or something. There we go. So we just want that kind of parabolic shape, and this is a pretty easy way to achieve that. So I'm just going to pause right here and then say current state to object, and then delete that, but it's going to stay in that same shape. So I'll delete this first one, because now we have this shape here. And look, this anchor point is at the center there, or at this point, which is cool. So now let's throw this in a cloner, and we'll do a grid array, and let's just make this endpoint and increase the amount that we have, because we want a bunch of these. Let's make a random effector, zoning out there for a moment, and yeah, let's get the position. We don't want too much variance in the Y, because let's pretend that they're all hanging from the same kind of position, but we do want quite a bit of rotation. So if we just let's do just a full 360, so it could be pointed in any which way. So now we have this, and we could say random position and rotation, whatever. Let's make another effector. It's random again, and this one. And by the way, when you have this selected, it's gonna automatically put the things in the effectors tab when I create a new one, if it's selected. If it's not, I'd have to drag them in. That's some relatively basic cinema stuff, but I'd like to mention it just in case there's people watching who don't happen to know and are wondering why it's not working. So we can just get the lengths quite different, and I don't want them going up like that, so I just can go to the effector and drag the minimum up, and there we go. So now we have this kind of variance of, I'm gonna turn my floor off again. So this is pretty neat. And if I then, let's just make this current state to object, just to have some fun with it. Actually, if I'm, oh, by the way, middle clicking will select an object and all of its children, which is also a very helpful shortcut to know. So you connect object and delete. And what we can do now actually is select everything and then, you know, UK again for shrink and then UI for invert. And we can put the hair tag back on here and go back to the beginning and say set fixed, and you know, just the default settings are actually, you know, totally fine. So you can see it just got a little bit of a sway there, and now all you need to do is go to simulate and forces. We can add a turbulence in here and go to here, and we need to throw it into the forces tab, and let's just lower the frequency, increase the scale, and up the strength, and you can see that we got a nice gentle sway to all these cables, which is pretty nice. And all you have to do here is, you know, you can actually, let's go into this last one. So if we grabbed this one, for example, here, you can spline wrap it onto this, and the fun thing about this is that it's going to automatically, let's do another clone. That's probably going to be long enough for most of them. Let's do one more just to be safe. And if I select this, it should think a lot for a second. Yeah, this is going to be a little bit heavier of an option, so yeah, that's not the fastest way to do it, but again, if you let this play out, it's going to have the animation there. So maybe you could actually then like right click this and export it as a limit, which is off the screen here. But instead of doing that, we can also just do something which much faster, and that's just going to be having this inside of a sweep object. And boom, you know, there you go. Nice. All right, moving on. Well, I guess just to reiterate, what we just did was build the pipes and cables for this scene here. And I didn't do anything with the UV maps for any of these models. Instead, I just used cubic projections and triplanar projections, etc. And there are just some noises that are piped into, like the roughness and bump of a pretty standard just octane metallic material. And you know, of course that would work just as well in Redshift. So really it's the modeling work is, you know, most of the battle in my mind. And then from there you're just playing around with materials and lighting until, you know, you have something that looks pretty cool. So yeah. All right, now let's take a look at a couple more of those takes from this neural network scene. So we can look at this one, the Polyfx one, and this Verona one. Just see if we can get through these pretty quickly. Right, so let's do the icosahedron one first. Something like that. A little bit more. So this polyeffects thing is pretty cool if you haven't used it. So you can use an effector in here. Let's use, not field, vector. Let's use the shader and scale it to -1. But we need to put a shader in here, so let's grab a noise. And we'll use something fun like the electric noise type. Get the scale larger, turn the brightness up, contrast, brightness down a little bit. Something like that, starting to look pretty cool. Turn the scale and brightness back up a little bit. So to animate this is super easy. We can just type in like 0.5 there, and we already have this kind of glimmering effect, which is pretty neat. We could make it track on the Z a little bit, so that the smaller pieces kind of come in and out, which is a pretty cool effect. And we can even duplicate this and put it inside of an atom array, and that will give us, oops, over here, 2.5. So this is a cool little effect here where it kind of looks like that Epcot dome that they have. It's just a nice little outline on there. So that's a nice effect and really easy to animate because we didn't even need any keyframes. So we can also make this other one with, instead of using the poly effects, we'll use the explosion deformer here. It's right in there. This is going to split it apart, so we just need to drag splash time, really quite far down. And wanted the thickness to be a little bit less. We don't need any of this gravity. We turn up the time. I gotta have the blast time a little bit higher up. Negative 18. There we go. Something like that. Nice. Cool. Take that back down. So now let's throw this into a fracture object. So we can use an effector here, and let's just use the same one that we were just using. So a great way to reuse your assets. Oh, what's going on? Oops, I forgot to say explode segments. There we go. All right, now it's working the way we expect it to. So yeah, none of these setups are hard to create, but if you can create enough of them and then layer them up, then it's going to start to look pretty cool. All right, let's look at the Voronoi one. Whoops. All right, let's make another sphere. Give it some subdivisions. Let's throw it in a Voronoi. And now let's just play with the seed and the sources so get a look that we like. That'll do. And there's a neat plugin that I would like to mention here, which is Xpresso, and that's from someone who you may know as Noseman, who's done a couple of these presentations before. So it's a cool little plugin. It's just a procedural way to do that Xpresso command that we've been using. So let's do a surface break edges. We can throw this in edge selection. Keep that, whoops, not Xpresso, put the Voronoi in here. And now you can see that we have this here. So we can keep these on hand just in case we wanted to make different variations of this. And just by toggling through the seed, you can see that it updates. All right, but let's just do current state to object. And oops, get rid of this one. And let's clone this bad boy. I'll scale it using the step effector, which is somewhere. There it is. And it's set to scale automatically. So let's go to the effector, bring this down to 0 because we don't want to get any bigger, but we can make it get a little smaller. All right. And about there. Let's get another clone in here. And let's right click this, and a little bit off screen it says Spline presets, and one of them is linear. So click that. So now we have an even distribution. And let's make this move now. So let's do that with a plane effector, yeah. And set a rotation of something high-ish. And let's make a fall off. That'll be a random field. And we'll set the animation speed to something like 25. Let's see how that looks. Alright, now let's get some more frames in here just so we can watch it play out. And now on the fall off, let's actually do a delay effector, which is going to be nested in here. And inside of this, we can actually have a subfolder, and let's throw a step effector, which is going to be in this list, into that one. Oops, I didn't hold shift. Throw that in there. And in our case, I think we want to invert this and maybe bring this up a little bit. So now you can see that the middle ring, or the closest to the center, is catching up over time. So it's a cool delayed effect that you can do. And so from here, you could either sweep this with a spline, or you could right click this. And I was using Octane in this case. On an Octane tag, you might say render as hair. Redshift works very similarly. And we might even be able to put match a Mo spline up to this. But maybe we'll talk more about the Mo spline in a little bit. Let's see if this works. I did not. All right. Well, we'll try out some Mo spline stuff in a little bit. Let's move on to some more effects, actually. So a quick note, actually, you'll notice that several of these are actually X particle systems, and I don't have nearly enough time to cover all how those work at this moment, but I will say that if you go online to Insidium's content repository, there's all these project files that they have there. So if you really want to, well, the way that I learned a lot of X particles is actually just downloading a bunch of these, and then you can dig through them, see how they work. So that's actually, I find, super helpful. So there's a tip there. If you're interested in looking into that, then there it is. All right, a brief word on optimizing. So let's just create kind of a hectic scene here. So we just gotta have all these cubes around. We even have this cube that's inside of this cloner. There's a bunch of it. That's good. And let's say that we have a sphere or capsule, I guess. And this one has a material on it. And maybe we copied this. We pasted it in several times. Stuff like that. So at this stage, these are stand-ins for all of our assets, conceptually, metaphorically. So before you animate, oftentimes it's good to do kind of a, an optimization sort of pass on everything. So in this case, we have a bunch of duplicate objects. You have all these duplicate materials. So in this case, we can just make an instance out of this and select all these and do a tool, replace with. So I just need to click this one and hit enter on the keyboard. Now we've swapped all those out. We can change these to render instances because it's going to be lighter on the machine. So your scene will run faster. And same with this cloner. Sometimes you'll need to be an instance if you're like deforming the geometry in some way. But if you're not, then choose render instance whenever you can. And if it breaks your effect, then leave it as instance. And for these materials here, let's just click all these ones and say select material tags, and you'll see they're selected here, 4 elements. Click this and then click this last guy. You'll see that now all these are assigned there. You can say edit, delete unused materials. And the other thing you can do is to, let's say, this robot zone here. So I've put everything into layers, and so that's really useful because you can turn them all off individually or solo them, but depending on which section that you're animating. So this is like don't show up in renderer, don't do any kind of animation, no Xpresso. So now we've made the ceiling invisible, so you could just turn off everything that you're not presently working on. And when you have really heavy scenes, that's becomes more and more important to do. Otherwise, you just can hardly even see your animation because the frame rate's so low. All right, so let's do some more stuff. All right, let's talk about takes. So to do that, I just have this little setup here. And let's just turn this mode on real quick. So I have just a sphere that's inside of a cloth object. I have this poly effect setup, which is just a simple plane effector scaling it to -1 with a linear field in its fall off. And then I have a sphere inside of an atom array. And in the takes over here, you can see I have 4 takes set up. And so I have isolated each of these setups inside an individual take. So you notice that everything else except for the poly effects has been turned off in this one. Then in the wireframe one, everything but the wireframe has been turned off. So what that allows me to do is I can render out each one of these as its own image sequence, and I can then composite them in an app like After Effects. So I could have this main one just as a solid marble, and then I could have this glass effect and this wireframe one, which I could use this poly effects pass as a luma mat for. So that's the kind of thing that the takes are very useful for. All right, so how do we set these up? Let's just go ahead and grab everything here, and oops, we're going to copy this into a new project. All right. Now, if we go make some takes, wireframe, what was it? Poly effects, glass, and solid, right? Yeah. So now you can see with this little white icon that we're inside of this first take or the second take, because you always have a main take by default. So inside of here, and by the way, it doesn't matter which one of these you're clicked on, it'll show you different things here, but you're going to be inside the one that has this icon. Now if I click anything while I'm in this take, you'll notice that all of these parameters have been grayed out. I can't change anything, but I can actually still manipulate objects in the screen with the gizmos there. And that's pretty much just exactly like as if I was in this main take manipulating them here. And you can tell that because if I go through all these, it's the same in all of them. So let's just undo that and see these are part of your undo history. Right, so we're back here. So in order to make a change that's only present in a take, I have to turn this auto take function on. And now anything that's blue, which is pretty much everything, I can change and make an override for that's only going to last inside of this take. So I can turn this off, for example, and right here you'll notice that these are both gray now, and that means that an override has been stored. So if I click this one again and move it off to the side using Gizmo, you can see that the Z parameter has an override stored. And if I didn't want that, I can right click it and say remove override. So now we're back to where we started. So now with this active, we can turn off all these other setups that aren't part of this one that we want for this take. And I could just leave it at this visibility toggle for both of these groups, and none of these will show up and only this one will. But I don't want it to compute everything's in there, especially if I did have a bunch of effectors and stuff going on. It's gonna give it more to think about. So might as well just turn all these off as well. And just for safety, I'll turn these off. All right, so we got poly effects there and wireframe. All right, cool. So something that might get you is if you're, by the way, this doesn't do anything if you're in the main take, but generally I like to turn it back off once I'm done making overrides, just so that, everything stays unchanged, or I'm not accidentally creating override I didn't want to make. So back in the main take, if I were to toggle all these off by default in this main one, now nothing's going to show up in any of these because I'm going to need to turn this back on and make sure that these are toggled on. So if we turn all these, we'll leave that on. If we turn all these on by default, we still might want to go in here and then toggle it off and then back on again. So it's going to store that override. So no matter what it is in the main one, it's always going to be on when I click this one. So let's turn these on and these ones. And these ones are still good. All right. So in the glass one, with the auto take function active, we can drag this glass material on there, and you'll see this a material tag has switched which material it's referencing, and it's stored that as an override. Now if I had, I'm going to turn this off, if I had a bunch of cubes in here, I'm just going to control drag them, instead of having to go in and replace the materials one by one, inside here, scroll this over, in each of these takes, you'll see all the objects that you've edited have or set an override for show up in this list. And inside this list I can create a group, and since I haven't edited any of these cubes inside of a take, they're not going to show up in this list, but I can grab them all here and then hover over the takes tab and then drop them in this group. So groups give you the ability to control the visibility of all the objects in the group and the tag. So I can just grab this material tag, drop it there, and then boom, you know, they all have the new material on them. So that can be obviously a much faster way to change materials if you have a lot of objects. So the last thing I want to cover is if I'm in this take right now and I'm thinking that I want to have the sphere size of this be larger, you know, if I have this on, it's going to only store an override in this take. And if I'm playing around with it back in the main one, if I'm changing, you know, it here, I'm going to forget that I had an override stored in this one. So it's best to, you know, make a global change. In order to do that, I can turn this off, and now this will act as if, you know, I'm in the main take essentially. So I can switch this to 5, and you can see it's larger, and I can lock this back up. Now I could make an override if I wanted to, or turn the override off, and you know, it's now locked in. So the last thing to do is to set some render paths. So to do that, we're gonna use the token system. So you can look at all these. The main ones I use is the project name and then the take, because it's gonna replace these strings of characters with the relevant pieces of information. So in this case, this one, $PRJ switches to the name of the project, and this, you know, $take switches to the name of the take that you're inside of when it's rendering. And if we wanted to throw this to a 3D renders folder, we can do that by just typing 3D renders /. Now you'll see when I click off, this little period / has appeared at the beginning. And what that's doing is it's looking inside of the folder that this 3D project lives in, and seeing if there's a 3D renders folder that's next to this 3D file. And if it's not there, it'll create one. And you can actually go up a folder by adding a second period there. So now it's going to go up out of the folder that the 3D project's in, and then look for this folder here called 3D renders. And again, if it's not available, it'll create one. So it's a pretty handy thing that it does. So I can do another folder with a project name and another folder with a take name. And so again, it's going to go 3D renders, create a name of the project, and then a name of the take as a folder, and then finally save the render sequence with the name of the project and the name of the take. So now we can use this same render settings for all of these, and they're all going to be named appropriately, and we don't have to create individual render settings with individual names. And that's pretty much all there is to it. This is the main use case, I think, for takes that we use Territory most often. All right, and that appears to be all the time that we have. So sorry I couldn't cover everything, and I apologize if it was a little bit quick, because there was, you know, of course, a lot to cover and a lot that I wanted to try to get in here. And hopefully maybe some of that was new, or, you know, you're interested in seeing the way that some things were built. Because again, we covered 3D modeling tools and how those were used to build, you know, the pipes that you see and the cables hanging from the ceiling. We also talked about some of the MoGraph setups that were used, and how you can, you know, make a bunch of these kind of elements and render them with the take system. You can bring them into your compositor of choice, and boom, you know, there it is. So let's just give one more look at, you know, how this all turned out. Yeah, so I hope you liked it. I hope you liked the presentation. And again, big thanks to Maxon for having me and for all the educational material they've released over the years. I've always really enjoyed watching them, so it was quite fun. And finally, thanks to you for stopping by, giving me some of your time. And maybe I will see you in the future. So until then, take care, everybody. Thanks.